Mission Inn Foundation on our history authors. Now, unfortunately, due to things that are going on at the Mission Inn, that is on hold right now, but we have put it together and it is essentially ready to go. We've also researched and developed a compendium of references of Riverside history. We've got 421, I believe, so far there. That was in conjunction with this. We've also accepted a greater number of online payments for memberships, merchandise, etc. We had a very successful book fair on October 1st. If you were here for that, you probably remember it was pretty busy. We also published our annual journal then, too. And we're running pretty low. If you don't have yours yet, you will, but we're gonna be ordering a few more. And then of course we held 5 meetings, our regular meetings. And those were about the modernist Riverside architecture of Clinton Mar, Barracks in My Backyard, the beginnings of the Ortega Highway, and last time we had Riverside's 3 for, see, when you don't come up with new presentations, you get to listen to me twice in a row. So, you know, that ought to spur everybody to get going on a topic there. And then, of course, the last one we'll get to here in a few minutes, so. Okay, upcoming activities. We're gonna publish our annual journal. Right now we're working on April or so. We will also publish our reference book on the Riverside writers and also that compendium of things. And also a book on Fairmount Park. Now when I say book, I'm not talking about the journal. The journal is a separate entity. All members get the journal for free, but we're going to be branching out into doing a few books here. Those will be part of our publication fund, and they will be for sale for the membership and anybody else too. We will hold another book fair, tentatively set for October 6th, and we'll probably be assisting with History Day again too. And definitely at the RUSD level, probably at the county level also. And then, as usual, we will continue to support other efforts throughout the city here, including our Totally Mount Rubidoux, Evergreen Cemetery, etc. Yeah. We've got a few programs coming up for next year. February 4th, we'll hear about the architecture of Julia Morgan by Jennifer Mamillion. On April 7th, we'll hear about the UCR Public History Relevancy Project with Dr. Catherine Goodis. And then June 2nd, Benjamin Jenkins will be here to talk about The Octopus's Garden, which is a book that he's done about the railroads, citrus, and the like, and how those all kind of melted together. And obviously October and December are still open here. So if you have any ideas, by all means, let us know. There. We will publish the booklet on our writers and references. We'll also publish the book on Fairmount Park. And we're going to begin to develop another special journal too. If you've been around for a couple years, you know we did a special journal for Riverside's 150th in 2020. We also did a special journal for Riverside's role in World War II. So we will be developing another one. Howard's got them there. Typically what we do is spend about a year researching, writing, and the like, and then it'll come out in 25. Then. Okay, questions on any of our recaps here? Okay, with that, then let's go on to our reports. And our first one is our financial report for 23. You can see, you want to? Okay, we'll hand it to Lynn, our treasurer.
Okay, it's a brief report. If you want a detailed one, I have a few copies. It's a full page. Our income, big income, of course, is membership, and that's been doing good. We got almost $6,000 last year just from membership. Books and journals, those are the 2 books we have, plus Legacy and the sale of journals, old ones. The silent auction really did us good this year. We had just over $1,000 in the silent auction, those special things. So that is really helping us there. Miscellaneous income of $310. So we had almost $10,000 worth of income last year. So that's a good amount of money coming in for our purposes. Expenses. The journal, we just did one last year. Website, the cost of that A big cost, of course, is insurance. We are required to have insurance. To use this facility, they require us to have insurance. And then we also have to have insurance on the board that's required for a nonprofit. Buying books, that's like the legacy book that we resell, ordering new copies of the World War II book and such. And then miscellaneous expenses are like our History Day prizes and such, P.O. box, postage. The total expenses of a little over $4,000. Now the exciting page. Our checkbook balance right now is $14,033.63. Of that, $6,625.20 is general fund for use. When we did the 150th anniversary book, when we started it, we were kind of scared on how it was going to come about. But by getting sponsors, Howard was our big sponsor getter, he got a lot of sponsors. We had enough to publish the book, and then when people bought it and paid for it, we had the publication fund we set up. So that we'd have funds set aside to do special publications down the road like we're doing. So of that checkbook balance, $7,400 is for publications that we can do. We had, when I took over as treasurer a number of years ago, we had a CD that I guess they've had forever with Bank of America that was like $8,800. You know what it was paying us?
1%.
Less than 1%. We were getting pennies each month on it. What I brought to the board and they had me do just about a month or so ago was take that CD plus a good amount that was just on our checkbook, and we opened a money market with US Bank with $25,000. That's getting us 4.5%. In less than a month, we made $58.62, which is more than I think the other one probably made in all the years they had it. So we're doing good right now financially. Yes, question.
Okay, so you have this money, but what are you going to spend it on?
That's one of the things we have. One of our board members is a big on planning, and we're working on having a planning meeting for the board, hopefully soon, this or not next year sometime, and start looking at what we can do with it. We've had some ideas in the past. Some of them fell through. I'll give you one example. A number of years ago, we offered and wrote a check to the Museum of Riverside to get a lot of their photos digitized. The person in charge of that was really willing, trying to get an intern in doing it, but the city official says no, so they gave us a check back. They wanted us to buy a new copy machine instead. So we have ideas, and something like that would have been great, and we're working on doing things that, you know, the money is there. But we didn't just want to sit there making pennies. We might as well have it in the money market now. If you have some ideas, give them to us, and we can discuss them on the board level, bring them back. But it's good to have a reserve. You know, a while back, there was some 1 or 2 years where we weren't sure if we're going to not have to pull money out of the CD. But with the publications and that, we've been able to turn things around. That we're on a very solid foundation basis. One of the benefits, not benefits, but probably, a lot of historical societies have a building which is a plus, but it's a minus because of the expenses. We don't have that. So, any questions on the financial?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. You must be doing pretty good marketing on that silent auction, because I saw a book at the last auction go for $250. The same book was on another table of used books for $30.
They just like us better.
Yeah. I don't know, but whatever. We'll take it for that. On another subject that Steve mentioned, we're doing the Fairmont Park book. I'm the one coordinating that. If you have old pictures, old things, or whatever, talk to me. We have about 7, 8 people writing articles on the different aspects of the history of Fairmont Park. We'll have that out by the next year, maybe by next fall for time for the book fair or something. Definitely by then, we'll have it out. So talk to me if you have any stories, and especially old pictures on Fairmont Park.
All righty. Okay, thank you, Glenn. All righty, our membership report. We have 173 memberships, broken out 103 general members. You can see 24 patron, 22 sponsor, and 24 life members there. And something new that we're adding this year, we also have a social media report, because we have 3,363 followers on our Facebook page there. That's a lot, and we keep getting more. And we get a lot more too, but we have to delete them because they give us weird stuff, etc. And we also have 281 Instagram followers too. So.
And also, there's a Riverside, New Jersey, so we gotta do that.
Yes. Yeah. Every so often we'll get a question. They like to do memorials for some of their veterans, and you can buy a brick. And we'll get questioned. I want to buy my uncle's brick, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Buy your uncle a brick. I don't care. But, okay, questions on the reports? Alrighty. Then let's move on. We have, of course, our December meeting is our election of directors. And first off, we need to give special thanks to two people, Nancy Cox and Kim Gerald Johnson, who have been on the board for quite some time, but they are both going to leave us from the board, so we want to acknowledge all of their service and the like. And then we also have a slate of nominees, for this next term, 2024 to 28, and that's Glenn Freeman, Debbie Newton, and Adeline Strelecki. There, Debbie's here with us today, over here in the corner. The other two, I guess, couldn't make it. So that is our slate. Is there anybody else who would like to nominate a friend or relative for one of the coveted seats on the RHS board? We always have a huge knockdown, drag-out fight for those seats on the board. So, if not, do I have a motion to approve the slate?
I move we approve the slate.
Okay, Howard, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, a second. All those in favor of it, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Groovy. Okay, that's it. Alrighty, so that'll be our new, our new inclusions in the board of directors there. And then announcements. I've got a couple here. March 2nd, we're going to be having the Riverside County History Symposium again, as we do every March. This year it'll be at Temecula City Hall, down in their community room, with a tour of Old Town Temecula. We're going to be hearing about Sarah Gilman and her days teaching at Morongo, beginnings of the Palm Springs Aerial Tramway by some guy you've heard before, Temecula, the town that grew by the trail, and also photos from the collection of Clarence Swift. That's a lot of the Hemet San Jacinto area there. And of course, our RHS special journals would make a great gift this season, so you can get them today.
Several of the authors are here, so you can get our autographs.
Yeah. Okay, any other announcements? Yes, Debbie?
So after 38 years of working for Riverside Unified, I'm still doing it for the history department. As Steve mentioned earlier, History Day is in January. It is Saturday, January 20th at Gage. It's in the morning. We are looking for more judges. If you've never had really the joy of judging, it's a fun morning. You get breakfast and snacks. You meet wonderful people, wonderful kids that have donated their time and energy researching things of history, some of them doing local history topics. It's not a problem. It's not a pain at all. I know John's looking over there. Yeah, we did that a few years. He's an Old King High School person. And so if you would like to join us, we would love to have you. All the information's on this sheet, and I'll leave it at the table. Please sign up. If you can't do it, if you have members of your family or friends that you think might be interested, please encourage them. You can do anything from watching a documentary, a web page, looking at a poster a fourth grader did, you know, they're all fun. And you never do it alone. That's the other thing. So if you're worried about, oh no, it's going to be stressful, it's not. Because you're with other people at all times. So we'd love to have you, and all the information's here for you. So thank you.
And how many positions are you looking for?
We need a total of 80 judges, and so I don't know where we're at right now, but the more the merrier, because someone always gets sick that day or whatever. So take a flyer, share it with a friend, come on down, I'll join you for breakfast that day.
Or, like on the board, nominate a friend. So, yes.
Yeah, my name is Mary Humboldt, and I'm on the board of Victoria Avenue Forever. We don't have as many members as you do, so that's a real goal, to match your membership. I'm a member also of the Old Riverside, the Historical Society. But what we've been doing is during COVID and slightly before, because of climate change, the roses have been dying on Avenue. We have noticed that, great big spots where there are no roses. And then plus some thieves stole the copper, whatever those things are, for the irrigation system. So for all of last summer before last, they didn't get any water. And in fact, we don't get rain anymore. It becomes very difficult to irrigate. There's a massive outbreak of roses on the island. So what we did is we ordered 5,000 roses, and we planted 5,000 roses last year. That puts a little dent in it, and we were missing 15,000. That's when I went out and counted. So if you could ever get some time to come and help us plant roses, we did it last month. We planted 500 in an hour and a half. It's not real hard work, and it's a lot of fun. Lots of kids come. And this next month in January, we're going to plant our memorial tree program, where you can donate $200 and get a tree for your whoever you want, or whatever you want. We're doing our best to march down the avenue and improve every single block. So if you can join, please join. If you can come out and help plant trees. Trees aren't real big, so they're not real hard to plant. So thank you so much.
Okay, are there any other announcements? Alrighty, we are going to, I just want to let everybody know, at the end of today's program, we're going to have a drawing for some fabulous door prizes, as you've seen over there. So make sure you stick around. That's why we had you sign in, because we're going to do it that way. So, okay, at this point, I'm going to introduce Mr. Jeff Houlihan, who's been sitting in the back patiently there. He is the Director of Curation, Collections, and Research. Did I get that right?
Close.
Close, okay. For the Marchfield Air Museum. He's the head honcho at the Marchfield Air Museum. I usually get the title wrong, but anyway. And he's here to talk about, of course, the history of Marchfield with us. So while we get him mic'd up there, and...
That should do. Can everybody hear me?
Okay, go.
Great.
Okay.
I have a few brief notes. So it should be pretty quick. And what we're going to talk about is the history of Marchfield. Of course, this is a brief history of Marchfield. We're not going to go into every single detail on it. I'm open to answering any questions as we go through, too. It's a very informal briefing. So we're going to just step our way through. Do we have a something to turn this with?
Yeah, arrow keys.
Arrow keys, got it. Today we're going to talk about several different topics. First, we're going to talk about how Marchfield developed, where it came from, why it was selected, its history during the First World War. We're also going to go deeply into Marchfield and the First World War, then continue on through the interwar periods, into the Second World War, preparation for it and the war itself. Then we're going to talk about the Cold War period and afterwards, and we're going to talk a little bit about where Marchfield is going from there. Now, I should say straight up front, of course, that I am a director at, one of the directors, and there's two of us, but I'm one of the directors at Marchfield Air Museum. So I'm not directly associated with Marchfield. However, I get to make up their history any way that I want. Since they don't have a historian and they don't have their PAO guy coming out here to do this, then I can just tell you anything I want to tell you about how Marchfield developed. Let's take a look at Alessandro Station. As many of you are probably aware, Alessandro Station, the railroad station there, is the site of Marchfield. It is Originally, it was a training field for Rockwell out of San Diego, where they would come up in this area, do their cross countries, and land in a field that was next to the station. You're looking at the station itself there. You're also looking at the Hendricks Ranch bunkhouse in the back. That is the area that our museum is at right now, but that's where the fields first began. And of course, we're talking there just before the First World War. Between 1912, when Rockwell opened, and 1917, when the First World War started, Alessandro Station was the key. Now, what ended up happening, of course, is the First World War. When the First World War started, the United States took a very careful look at its capabilities and looked at what was going on in Europe. It was a different kind of war. It was a war based on technology. All those things that everyone thought were going to make life better for people, the common people, were turned against people. Technology tended to make it easier to kill people in large, large numbers. And looking at this, things like machine guns, tanks, submarines, and aircraft, we looked very carefully at our own capabilities and realized we were way, way beyond or behind everyone else. At the time that the First World War began, the United States had 26 qualified aviators in its entire group. And that was it. Excuse me. You don't mind listening to me drink occasionally, too. Knowing that we were in serious trouble if it ever came to the point that we were going to be involved in the First World War, Congress let out a $640 million budget saying, let's upgrade aviation. $640 million in 1917 was a hell of a lot of money. It's a lot of money now, and it was an incredible amount then. No one in their right mind looked at that $640 million and said, I don't want any of that. So all across the country, because part of this was the plan to open up 32 separate small airfields throughout the country for training and for operational work. So every responsible chamber of commerce immediately began to talk about why it was important that one of those fields be in their location. We were very lucky as a community at the time, of course, to have Frank Miller, and of course Hiram Johnson backed the entire play too, but it was Arthur Sweet, I believe, who led it, the Riverside Chamber of Commerce, who decided that we need to get in on this aviation. We already have a small little bitty aviation field. We can expand that into something impressive. At the time, of course, we were clocking about 300 flight days per year. The weather was beautiful. It was much better. Certainly we could compete with someplace like Iowa without any kind of difficulty. So they put together a program. That program brought the War Department people out to Riverside area, and they ran them through. They promised everything in the world to these individuals, including they were going to build the field. They were going to help build it. They were going to provide a railroad line to it. They were going to also give a spur, and they were also going to build a road that went directly into Riverside, so that anybody who was stationed at the field wouldn't have to be stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Now, I'm a Moreno Valley resident, which I shouldn't probably say with the Riverside Historical Society, right? But, as you know, even today, that's a bit on the distant side. So, at that time, in 1917, it was out in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. So, by promising to build a road and promising to build facilities that would help the people that were stationed at the base, that made a very big deal. It also helped considerably that we had exceptional weather. That exceptional weather made a big difference in deciding what was going to happen. So, luckily, we were selected as one of the 32 aviation fields to be built in the United States with that $640 million. Sergeant Garlick that you see here, Frank Garlick, he's up in the left-hand corner. He and his team, and that's his entire team that you're seeing there in the wagon with him. That's it. Came up from Rockwell Field and took Alessandro, the area where the grass strip was, and hired some mule skinners from Colton, leveled the area out, and in the space of 60 days created an operational airfield. So that is probably one of the quickest government contracts I've ever seen taken care of. That happened in February of 1918, and by March, they had opened up the airfield. Now we're looking now at Lieutenant Harold Compierre. Can anybody guess which one Harold is?
The guy smuggling
Which one looks like the toughest human being there, right? That's Harold Compierre, who absolutely epitomizes what a pilot ought to be, right? He's a tough guy, smoking a cigarette. He's kind of rumpled looking. Well, Harold Compierre is a legend in the Riverside area. Harold Compierre was an expert in bugs, parasitic bugs that eat the bugs that eat citrus. So you can all see how that made him rather important. But he began his career working up at Stanford as a gardener, but when the First World War came, he decided he wanted to be a pilot. So he enlisted, and he is actually the first person to ever land an aircraft at the newly named Alessandro Field. And that's what we were at the time. He went on later, of course, to become an absolute legend in his field. With his aviation background, now he flew all over the world, went anywhere. He's been described as an Indiana Jones of bugs. But he lived here in Riverside until I believe he passed on in about 1988. An incredible young man. So why is it named March Field? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The biggest reason is, of course, that the military at the time named airfields after fallen aviators, guys who had died in aircraft accidents. Why did they do that? Why didn't they name them after someone who was killed, say, in a war or something of that nature? Because we hadn't had an aviation contingent in any conflicts yet. Without an aviation contingent, the best way to do it was to select someone who was from the local area, been killed in aviation, which happened a lot then. It's an incredibly dangerous occupation as it is today. Normally what they do is take somebody local because they wanted the local community to support the new airfield. They wanted the local area congressman to have a connection to that field, and it helped considerably to be able to raise funding and stuff too. So why Peyton C. March, Jr.? Well, on March 8th, when the airfield opened as Alessandro Army Airfield, they sent a letter, the guys here sent a letter forward to DC to the War Department. And they asked that Sacramento Army Airfield be named after Lieutenant Mather, who had died in an accident there and was from the area. And they asked that Alessandro Field be named after Byron Jackson, a lieutenant who died, who was from this local area. The letter came back saying, in the future we'd appreciate it if you'd let us name our own airfields. So, thanks for your opinion. But the War Department said, Lieutenant Carl Mather, that's okay. Sacramento Army Airfield can be Mather Field from now on. However, Alessandro Field will be named March Field after Peyton C. March, Jr. The letter was countersigned by the Chief of Staff of the United States Army at the time, Peyton C. March, Sr. So he named, and now don't get me wrong, Peyton C. March, Jr. did give his life for his country. He was killed in an aircraft accident in San Antonio, and he certainly deserves to have the name, his name immortalized in the base, but he'd never been to California. He'd never been out here, never been. But having your dad as the Chief of Staff of the Army is a good way in. So if anybody tells you that things are too politicized in Washington, D.C., and there's too much insider stuff going on, it's not something new. It's been that way since the beginning. Construction continued at March after the First World War began, our aspect of it in 1917. And what you're looking at here is a water tower picture. This is my favorite picture of March Field in the early days. It's 1918. The young man who's currently unidentified, we're working on trying to figure out who he is sitting on top of the water tower looking over the base. Now, not only is, I'm sure OSHA regulations didn't apply then, but it's an incredible view, and you can see the original hangars. Now, frequently when you go to the base, and if you're lucky enough to get a tour of the base itself, you'll see some hangars that they refer to as the old hangars. What they often believe are the originals. They were not the originals. These are the original hangars. They were all made of wood, and they lined up along basically where Cactus Boulevard is now. So the orientation of the runway in those days was different than it is now. And you see, he's overseeing the entire thing. There were 12 hangars built, and the assorted buildings to go along with them. There were approximately 12, I believe there were also 12 barracks at the time, and close to 50 buildings. The wooden buildings that were constructed were for the aircraft and for the shops. They were also officers' quarters. The men that lived there, the enlisted men, lived in tents. The picture that you're seeing on the right-hand corner here, that's the main gate. And you'll notice it looks out over Moreno Valley, which looks roughly similar today. I can't even get a laugh out of that. You could see why remoteness was a really important thing. By the time they got done constructing the buildings there were 50 buildings in total. So it was a relatively comfortable feel and very effective and formulated as a training center. Looking here at the aerial view of March Field as it operated during the First World War. These are just a little bit later on it, but you'll see how quickly it all developed. You'll see the grass runway off to the left, and all of the administrative buildings and the tent city on the right there too. You're looking at JN4 formation. A JN4 is a Curtis Jenny. Very popular training aircraft during the period, and the first aircraft to land at March Field was a JN4. Curiously enough, the first contingent of aircraft that came to March Field from Rockwell Field in San Diego were in boxes. They simply put them on the railroad cars and drove them up there this way. It was a little safer and easier to get them all up there. Now off to the lower right, looking at the Officers Club, which was located at the Mission Inn. So in our port, now I could say this because I'm a former Air Force officer, but it is incredibly important to make sure that you have a comfortable Officers Club. It's every bit as important as putting a runway down. And I know there's an old saying in the Air Force that the best way to do this is when you get funding for a new base, you go there, you immediately build the Officers Club and any assorted things to it, and then you go back to Congress and say you ran out of money, you need something for the runway. Not sure if they did that, but you'll see that for the beginning, the Officers Club was the center of activity, and the Officers Club was located at the Mission Inn. You couldn't ask for a better place to go, so that's where they went. That's also where the headquarters was at the time, too. They stayed in the Mission Inn. The enlisted men were able to use the YMCA as their club. Captain William Carruthers was the first person to be in charge of March Field when he came in 1918. Now, we're going to run through, because I am a curator of an air museum, we're going to run through some pictures of airplanes because I like them. You're looking at the flight line at March Field now. That is a SPAD that you see, which is a French-built aircraft. That's what the United States used during the First World War. One of the aircraft that they used. We had not built up enough of an infrastructure in our aviation facilities to really build our own airplanes. We simply bought them from the French. That was the quickest and easiest way to do it. And as you look down, you're going to look at the aircraft hangar at March Field, the inside of it, and then of course, over to the right, it's a captured Fokker D7. And you'll notice the gentleman leaning on it now. Something about aviation, and I'm going to be totally prejudiced about that, but there is something about aviation that simply draws people that have a sense of style. Notice the young man leaning against the Fokker D7. He has his arms crossed and his legs crossed, his hat pushed down, and he's staring at the camera saying, "I know you're here just to take a picture of me, so go ahead." As the field developed as a training one, and of course you'll see DH-4s here on the left. At one of those rare cold mornings at March Field, then over on the right we're looking at JN-4s also, and another picture of DH-4s. DH-4s were a British designed aircraft that we used extensively during that time period. The JN-4s that you see in the upper upper right-hand picture were engaged in a fire patrol. Something that the field started doing almost immediately. They would go out and look for any kind of forest fires and then report them back. It was a way to be a service to the community and a way to be able to justify the aviation budget. On again to a couple of other really cool airplane pictures. You'll see Flight Instructor Nash as he poses next to his Jenny, and a DH-4 out on actual fire patrol, and some more flight instructors. Aviation in those days was an incredibly dangerous occupation. It was not uncommon to lose several people in the normal span of training. It was simply accepted. The good part about it was that the aircraft performance at the time was so low. In fact, most of the aircraft that were operating at that time had engines in them that would not even make a decent motorcycle today. So they tended to be reasonably slow. So if you were lucky enough to be able to put it down correctly, you could survive an accident. However, anything over 200 feet and you're finished one way or the other. So very, very dangerous job. They had a great right to consider themselves an elite. Once again, because of my love of airplanes, we're going to look at some crashed airplane pictures. Why? Because it was an incredibly important issue in the First World War, especially. You saw an awful lot of crashes and a lot of mishaps, and I happen to think crash pictures are really neat. As you can see the ones that people walked away from. I'm not sure who was involved in the JN-4 crash that you see at the center bottom. but I'm guessing somebody got some real lessons in taxiing after that. Yet more cool pictures of airplanes crashing. I think if you'll take a look at the aircraft in the right-hand corner of the JN4 there, it's a young man sitting on it. It is a very common thing as you sort through the photographs that we have in existence of that particular time period when an aircraft crashed. If you were lucky enough to survive it, then you got your picture taken with the airplane. So, sort of like a trophy. I did this and I'm still here.
Oh, upside down.
That's a Thomas More Scout. This happened probably right around 1918, 1919, right in that cusp period. The Morse Scout was an excellent small aircraft designed in the United States and built in the United States, never quite made it overseas. But you'll see that's an alternative landing. I'm not exactly sure how he did it, but it's amazing that the upper wing is still completely intact. So whoever was flying it undoubtedly survived this. After the war, the requirement, and the United States has been this way almost since our complete existence. It's changed a bit now, but after the war, people didn't think it necessary to maintain a large military. So there was a giant drawdown. That drawdown took March Field basically out of the loop. In 1923, they decided to put it in cold storage. Now, March Field always talks about itself, and it should, as being the oldest continuously operating field on the West Coast. It's one of the oldest fields in the country, with Scott Field being a little bit older, and obviously Ohio has Wright Field, which is a little older. But that's it. We're like number 3 as far as that. But in 1923, they decided that they were going to draw down. Now, it didn't officially close, and it was only used for emergency landings and for training missions occasionally from other fields. But the entire airfield was turned over to one sergeant, and he lived there with his mother. So that continued as a budget-saving measure for several years, 4 to be exact. In 1926, Congress created the Army Air Corps, and they approved a 5-year plan to increase the size of the Air Corps. During that time period, funds were appropriated for March Field to reopen. They started to restaff it again, and it reopened in 1927. Now, the original orders for the reopening were rebuild the field, get it operational as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that we can start pushing people through there quickly. It was nearly completed by August of 27 when Millard Harmon, a major, was reported in, and he was given some specific orders. He was told, you know, we've decided at the War Department that March Field is going to be a showpiece. So all the work that the previous commander did to put the place together was torn down, redone, and it began to be rebuilt in the Spanish mission architecture that you see today. Classes begin very shortly after they reopened, and you're looking at the field as it starts to grow. Now, if you go out there today, you will see many of these things still there. The red and white hangars, the roofs that you see. The central picture here, right in the middle, that's the old headquarters building. So it still exists today, and then the field behind it is also still there. At the other end is Hap Arnold's house, which we'll move on to a little bit later on this, but you'll see how the field is growing. Not only is it growing, it's now changed its orientation. Instead of being lined up basically along what is now Cactus Avenue, they shifted the runway so it runs more of a north-south orientation. And that same runway orientation is what you'll see today. It continued on. They began building hangars in 1929, and those are still in existence now. Let's take a look at the headquarters building in 1932. You can very definitely see how the architecture changed and how it is turning into a really beautiful field. I'm sure many of you have already been there a number of times, but it is one of the most attractive bases that the Air Force has. It competes with any of them, the Air Force, as far as beauty. The older areas at March Field are exceptional in their architecture. You see in the upper right-hand picture, and then in the lower right-hand picture, you get a better sense of what was out there at the time, which is basically nothing, except for the field, which is what made it so incredibly attractive. Now in 1931, things changed considerably for March Field. The first thing that happened is all aircraft training moved to Randolph Field in Texas. So March, instead of being a training center, became an operational field. So the aircraft assigned there were given specific missions, whether those were pursuit missions, bombing missions, observation and such. But something else changed that ended up being a very important thing for March and for the Army Air Corps. Hap Arnold. Lieutenant Colonel Hap Arnold was assigned to March Field. He was given some very specific orders when he came out here. He was told, you have to do everything to make the Air Force and the Air Corps look good. I want you to get in touch with Hollywood. I want you to make sure that you can make some movies, get in the public eye. The Air Force learned very early on, even when it was a part of the Army, that the way to ensure that your existence continued and that your prosperousness continued was to raise your public profile. If everybody out there thinks you're neat, they're going to tell their congressman that, and their congressman is going to vote the money that you need in order to be able to expand. And technology was another real key in this too. And Hap Arnold, who is basically the father of the modern Air Force, took these instructions and ran with them. Now he had been assigned out on the West Coast for years. He'd actually been out at Rockwell Field about 1912, just after he got his pilot's license. He had military aviator license number 2. And the only reason he wasn't number 1 is because he was there with a friend of his and they just sort of said, oh, yeah, you can have it. That's it. But he's as early as you can possibly get. He learned to fly from the Wright brothers. So, an incredible man. In order to raise the public profile of March Field, he started a flight to Alaska. He was attempting to prove the reach aviation had, that we could go all the way from California, go all the way up to Alaska. We could come from different locations straight to Alaska too, and do it successfully. Of course, it wasn't a non-stop mission by any stretch of the imagination at the time, but they successfully did that. Went all the way there and then back again. He started air shows at March Field. In 1932, you see him bringing the governor through the air show in an attempt to be able to raise that profile. And standing on the balcony of the base headquarters, a little hard to see in this particular picture, but that's Amelia Earhart. So Hap, and
That's her hair.
That's her.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's obviously, that's before she was lost. She knew exactly where she was when she was there. So we have an artifact out at the museum that is supposedly an oil wrench from her toolkit. I'm still trying to find out whether it's real or not, but it's got her name on it spelled wrong, which is not necessarily bad. I mean, you know, because it's quite possible that whoever lifted it didn't really know how to spell her name when they drew it on the oil wrench. And that's a pretty common thing, and you'll find out at the museum there are several things that appear to be souvenirs more than anything else. But there is a long tradition in the American military where they compare and say, well, you know, the Germans fight for the fatherland, the British fight for the Queen, and Americans fight for souvenirs. Which is great if you run a museum, because that means cool stuff is going to come home all the time. Let's move on and talk a little bit about more what Hap Arnold did. Hollywood. Does anybody know what the very first Oscar, what movie that went to?
Wings.
Wings, right? Aviation. If aviation can be cool, then people are going to give you money, and that's the key. If you can make it attractive and interesting, you see Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, Myrna Loy there in 1938. See him again in 1938, another picture with the brand new bomber at the time, B-17. And then down at the bottom in 1934, P-26s and a camera on top of it. And Hollywood is such an important part of the military. Another fine example of that is, of course, for years and years, the United States Air Force, the United States Army Air Force, before that, they wore leather jackets called A2 jackets. They were very popular during the Second World War. After the Second World War, they were eliminated. They weren't the most efficient things in the world, so the military got rid of them. Later on, in the 1980s, a movie came out. That movie came out, and the aviator in that movie was not Air Force, but he wore a leather jacket. And that leather jacket became an icon. It became something that everybody thought was the neatest thing in the world. What did the United States Air Force do? Reissued A2 leather jackets, knowing that, you know, that's a great recruiting tool and it's an excellent way to keep in the public eye. Of course, that movie was Top Gun. And for the Navy, for tertiary aviation service, they did really well with that. I'm going to get away with that one here, right? Let's move on here real quick and talk a little bit about technology. One of the other things that Hap Arnold, and I'm a bit remiss, I'm sure most people already know this because Hap Arnold is certainly a legend, but the reason he was called Hap is because if you see pictures of him, he looks like he has a smile on his face all the time, perpetual smile. From those who dealt with him in a military perspective as he was the commander and stuff, he was not necessarily the happiest guy in the world. That was just the way his face looked. So Hap is his nickname, and you see it frequently. Now, let's tilt this a little. Can you hear me a little better now? There, okay. He was given the requirement to contact as many high-tech people as he possibly could and make sure that aviation in the United States was on the cutting edge. Now, Hap had been involved in this since the First World War. He'd actually been involved in developing what was called a kettlebug, which is a remotely piloted vehicle during that time period. So he was always focused on technology. Here you'll see wind tunnel tests at Caltech in 1931. That's a B-17 flipped upside down, a model of one that they're doing in 1935. But his job was to do everything he could to make sure what would become JPL, and of course Caltech, were right there with the Air Force, and the Air Force was connected to them as it was. He learned very early on that technology is the key to success when it comes to aviation. Civil support. Knowing, of course, that flying fire patrols is important, they continued that. But even more important, Jefferson High, you're looking at Jefferson High in Long Beach. In March 10th, 1933, there was a giant earthquake that pretty much leveled Long Beach. It was a devastating quake, and what Hap did is he immediately began flying support in from March Field. He did not wait for permission. In fact, he considerably irritated the Army commander who was in charge at the time in the Presidio, because he waited for nothing. He simply knew it was happening, he loaded up the aircraft, and he went. It got spectacular publicity for the Air Force. Spectacular for the Army Air Corps, so he did exactly what he was originally intending to do. He helped out, and he got the publicity. Now, the Navajo Reservation blizzard from 1932. A major blizzard that cut off the entire reservation. The animals there and the people were starving. There was no way to be able to bring any food in. The railroads were stuck, the roads were all covered. So Hap loaded up the bombers at March Field with supplies, both hay and food for people, and he flew over the Navajo Reservation and dropped them. Of course, not only did he do these things, he made sure that when he did them, there were newspapers there. Not to take away from his humanitarian instincts, they were there, but he made sure that, you know, and the way he phrases it in his own writings is he said, it's important that we publicize these types of activities because this will give us the money to build more and more. As we build more and more, we can do more of these things too. So increase our capability, we've got to make sure that somebody's there to see it. Of course, when the Great Depression came, everybody's budget was cut, and cut terribly, to the point that officers in the United States military were part-time. They would only work maybe 30 hours a week, and their pay was cut considerably then. Same thing with the enlisted troops. They worked part-time. As the Civilian Conservation Corps came into being, officers were tasked with leading these groups. You're all aware of the Civilian Conservation Corps, of course. It was designed as a work project to be able to bring people who were unemployed, give them something productive to do, pay them, and allow them to develop some skills, allow them to develop some regimentation. By this time, of course, things were already turning somewhat south in Europe and in the Far East, so it wasn't too difficult to see that we needed to militarize a bit in order to prepare for what was likely to come next. So the Civilian Conservation Corps helped with that. Now, Civilian Conservation Corps District number 26 headquarters was at March Field, and Hap Arnold was the commander of District 26. It got to the point that later on, during the Great Depression, 80% of the officers at March Field were actually doing CCC work. To the point that Hap insisted with Washington, D.C. that they call out the reserves because it was getting to the point that some of his pilots just hadn't flown enough to be able to maintain their proficiency. So they called the reserves and replaced many of them. But it was quite a bit of activity during the war itself. Excuse me, during the Depression itself. As the expansion continues, you'll see the new barracks put up in 1936, the hospital, the officers club. Had to move out of the Mission Inn and have our own officers club then. And then of course the theater. All these buildings still exist. And if you get the opportunity to get a tour of the base, you'll see them there. They're in excellent condition. The architect for all of this was somebody that you might be familiar with. It was Myron Hunt. So everything there was designed with the same sort of mission, Spanish revival or colonial look. It's they're all beautiful buildings and incredibly well made. Let's quickly talk a little bit more about Hap. You see him here at the right. He was transferred back to Washington, D.C. in 1936. He became a deputy there and later became the commander of the Air Forces too. But you'll notice that in the uniform that I've got his picture up there for, that was later on in the war. Hap Arnold was the only 5-star general the Air Force ever had. This was a man who took an organization and expanded it from 15 groups to 30 groups just before the Second World War. He took an organization that had 1,500 people at the beginning of the Second World War and turned it into an organization of 2.5 million. They had less than 80 combat effective aircraft and created one that had tens of thousands of combat effective aircraft. So he is considered in the United States Air Force as the father of the Air Force. He is probably the most important single individual that we have. As he went off to Washington, D.C., you'll see in 1941, he created what was called the Army Air Forces, the Army Air Corps, now morphed into the Army Air Forces. Not the Army Air Force, the Army Air Forces, because it was all the different numbered Air Forces together, and that's the way he looked at it. By this time, too, the aviation budget had been steadily increasing during the 1930s, and largely because it was looked at that the aviation branches and the Navy were the ones that were going to protect us from being involved in any European or Far Eastern wars. We have oceans with aircraft and with ships. We'll be able to keep them away from our shores and we won't have to worry about it. By the time Hap Arnold made it to Washington, D.C. and was in charge, the aviation budget was increased to $300 million, which is huge. It's not quite the $640 million of the First World War, but it shows the concern that everyone had that things were going to go badly. Preparing for the war, these are photographs from Marchfield itself. See up in the corner a B-18, which was basically obsolescent by the time the Second World War started, but it was an all-metal monoplane bomber. And then, of course, the B-17B model with one of the hangars in the background from March. Beautiful aircraft. One of the benefits of doing talks like this is I get to put the pictures in there that I like. This particular one is a squadron picture from Marchfield about 1940. Now, take a look at it, and I think this is the epitome of the Air Force. Love it. Love the Air Force, grew up in it, served in it myself. But take a look at, if you see anything odd about it. I won't keep you in too much suspense. Notice the anti-glare panel on the engines. The anti-glare panel is designed because those are bright metal aircraft, so you want to make sure it doesn't reflect into the pilot's eyes, right? So you put an anti-glare panel which is black, you just paint it black. Now notice on the left-hand side of the aircraft, those are positioned properly. On the right-hand side, they're on the wrong side. So somewhere, some poor crew chief told one of his junior guys, he said, okay, I need you to paint these aircraft, these anti-glare panels on the airplane. Well, where do I put them, Chief? He said, well, they go on the left side just like this. So he painted them all the way across on the left-hand side, which makes them useless on that side. But I think it's hilarious. Not only is it hilarious that the mistake was made, it shows that we're all human. Even then, the greatest generation even did this occasionally. But it also shows that, yeah, they didn't mind. They just took the picture anyway. Figured nobody noticed. That one's actually up on my office wall. It's so great. Let's talk about 1941. The Second World War is in full swing everywhere else, but we're not involved in it yet. We are building up our forces, though. We're building them up considerably so that we can be prepared when something happens, if it happens. There's an entertainer in Los Angeles at the time who was looking at a way to publicize his show, Bob Hope, He was doing the Pepsodent Hour at the time. And his producer told him, hey, my brother-in-law is sitting out at March Field, and there's 15,000 guys out there, and they have nothing to do. They're the best audience that you could possibly have. They'd be thrilled at an opportunity to see somebody from Hollywood or people from Hollywood. Why don't you go out there and put on a show? So June of 1941, Bob Hope came to March Field and he put on his first USO show. And he loved it. Not only did he loved the fact that all these people were excited to have him there, it gave him great publicity, an opportunity to do something that he felt was worthwhile, and he obviously continued that. Bob Hope continued from his first show there at March Field all the way through Desert Storm, and continued to go and entertain troops anywhere. And any of us that have ever been in the military, during the time that he did come out and do it, we all love Bob Hope. He may not have had the best jokes in the world, but he was always there, and it didn't matter whether your war was popular or not. Bob Hope was there. So his first show was at March Field, and we're very, very proud of that. At the time, of course, 1940, March Field became the headquarters for the 4th Air Force. It was activated in October, and then redesignated as an air defense facility. We're in charge of the air defense for the entire western United States. So a very important role. Now, if you'll take a look at the picture that we have up in the left-hand corner here, that's a picture of the main gate in 1938. Do you recall a picture in 1918 where you were looking out and there was absolutely nothing out there? Well, take a look again, and what do you see?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Yeah, it's still out there pretty distant, and there's not a lot around there. As World War II came along, March Field became incredibly important as an operational training unit. Operational training means that they're not training individual pilots or air crewmen how to fly or how to do their job. They're training them to operate as a team. So they would bring entire units in, and they would do their training, formation flying, bombing, all of the stuff associated with it would be trained out of March Field. So entire units. So that's why frequently when you see photographs and stuff of March Field during the time period, you don't see basic training aircraft. You don't see BT-13s. You don't see PT-19s. You don't see the basic stuff. What you see are combat aircraft. You see B-24s. You see P-38s. You see those kind. Now you're looking at the 30th Bomb Group there over to the right, pretty substantial. Now, March Field played quite a role in training during the Second World War, but training domestically was obviously incredibly important. But it was also very, very dangerous. During the Second World War, the United States Army Air Forces lost 15,000 men in stateside training accidents. I've got a journal from a young man who was a flight instructor at March Field where he talks about having 6 fatal accidents in one single day. We've got to remember what they're doing here is they're taking people who may or may not even have a driver's license, and they're putting them in aircraft that are cutting-edge technology, sometimes cutting-edge technology that is a bit beyond its own capability. It's a wartime expedient. You're pushing as hard as you can, and so accidents do happen. He also has one section in his diary where he talks about a young man flying a B-25 who simply lost what's referred to as situational awareness and spiraled the aircraft in, killing himself and the entire crew. They could find nothing wrong with the aircraft itself. It happens, and it happened considerably during that time period. Let's take a look at March as it developed during the Second World War. Many of the facilities that still exist were built then. The hospital, which of course doesn't exist anymore, but the dental office, barber shop, link trainers area, that's simulator training, radio training, bomb loading. These are all shots of March Field during the Second World War, showing how large it has grown and how it continues to grow. And of course, WASP were here, Women's Air Force Service Program. Pilots were there during the war also. A little bit of a formal dinner. And the Child Care Center. Formal dinner actually looks pretty good, doesn't it? It's not a bad assignment. If you manage to not be killed, it's great. But that pretty much goes for every military assignment. The March Chapel. At the museum, you'll see some original windows from the first chapel there that are displayed, oddly enough, behind our bar. And then a little bit of enjoying California. It was not a bad place to be during the war. When the war ended, it became an even better place to be. And you'll see that as a transition period, as jet aircraft came into being, the first pursuit group came to March Field. It changed from being a training location to being an operational airfield again with fighters and then with bombers. You'll probably recognize some of the terrain there also. The 15th Air Force came in 1959. The 15th Air Force at one time controlled all of the nuclear weapons, ICBMs and bombers west of the Mississippi River. They were at one time the most powerful military force mankind had ever seen. They had the ability, these single commanders had the ability to destroy life on Earth. It was an incredible organization that had incredible amounts of responsibility. You'll also see that out of the 14 men that were commanders of the 15th Air Force, all of them were very experienced Second World War pilots, people who were reliable and they could depend upon to make the correct decisions and whatever was going on. 1949 flight line. This is a little bit of climate change. Don't really see snowstorms like that very often now, or ever. You'll also see our connection with the Mission Inn and with Riverside itself. Just as important, you'll see the Flyers Wall. I attended a ceremony for an astronaut the other day. We'll put her wings on the Flyers Wall. This is General Martin, who was putting his wings on the Flyer Wall. He was a 15th Air Force commander. He was a pilot during the Second World War, too. Now, if there are any ex-military people here, I know some. Former military? Okay, what's wrong with the picture? It's part of the fun of looking at old photographs, is trying to find something that doesn't match or isn't right. General Martin is getting his picture taken. A man who was an absolute hero, getting his picture taken, putting his wings on the wall to show his position in aviation and his epaulets out. See, it's above his collar. Right here. It should be tucked under his collar, but it's not. It's out. So, whoops, right? He's gone down to eternity as not having his uniform right. Now that is a military thing. That is, only us former military would look at that as a big deal. It's a big deal. Yeah. Now, for the next 3 decades, March is going to play a vital role as the center of Cold War deterrence. During the Korean War, this, of course, is one of the B-29s that was assigned to the 22nd Bomb Group, which came with the 15th Air Force in 1950, operating in Korea. This is a B-50. You see the nose art on it. That nose art is replicated at the museum, too. The aircraft itself is beer cans somewhere, unfortunately. But it shows the connection. The connection to the community was there and stayed solid through the entire time that March was in existence. B-29s and B-50s that they flew about 335 combat sorties in Korea, dropping over 6,500 tons of bombs. B-29s and B-50s were very effective in Korea. It was an incredibly difficult operation simply because you're taking technology from the Second World War and throwing it into combat with technology of the jet age. So it was a staggeringly difficult job. A MiG-15 would make mincemeat out of a 29 or a 50 in very little time. So they ended up flying mostly night missions. And it gave them more impetus to bring in more aircraft that are higher capacity and capability. In 1953, March Field converted to B-47s and brought in KC-97's refueling aircraft. Now this is the beginnings of what March did for the next 25 years. Aerial refuelers and bombers. That was the key to our operation there and what we did. The B-47, a beautiful aircraft. Absolutely beautiful. I've never flown one. I have been told repeatedly that they were difficult to fly. They were challenging, but I don't know anybody who didn't love them. And I think it's more for the way they looked. And then, of course, the KC-97. We've got both aircraft out at the museum, a KC-97 and a B-47, if you ever want to take a look at them. During the Cold War period, General Archie Old became the commander of the 15th Air Force. He also loaned his name, of course, to the golf course, which is every bit as important as being commander of the 15th Air Force. He engaged in Operation Power Flight in 1957, where he took 3 B-52s on a non-stop flight around the world. Now, of course, that non-stop flight depended upon aerial refueling. So they continued through. It took, let me see the exact numbers here, 45 hours and 19 minutes all the way around the world. An impressive feat at the time, an impressive feat now too. You'll see the 15th Air Force Combat Operations Center. If you've ever seen the 1980s movie War Games,
Yeah.
it's largely based off of that. The reality of it, you'll notice the large TV cameras at the beginning. If you do get a chance to go to the museum, we do have a section that's about the 15th Air Force that includes substantial portions of the 15th Air Force Operations Center, including their status board and some consoles from it. From there, they controlled the entire nuclear force west of the Mississippi River, so it was that section that made the decisions and implemented those decisions to the entire 15th Air Force. It's a very important, it's hard to overstate the importance of March Field during the Cold War period. Let's take a look at the connection between March Field and Riverside again. In let me get my date actually perfect, 1963 in September, B-52 City of Riverside being the first B-52 to arrive here at March Field. Also a beautiful aircraft. And then you're seeing an alert scramble there at the lower right. They maintained alert forces at March Field all the way through the Cold War period. Armed aircraft with nuclear weapons who were ready to go at a moment's notice. Luckily, they practiced it a great deal, but never had to do it for real. You'll also see an alert crew sitting outside the BX at March Field, and notice the guy in the back, kicked back and semi-asleep. And those of us that have ever stood alert before can tell you that you spend most of your time asleep. I should never say that though, right? Of course, there was a KC-135 Stratotanker with the name of the Mission Bell also. So that connection to the community has always been very important for March Field. It's what's kept us alive and kept us functioning in areas that we never would have been able to without the Riverside area. Let's take a look at the Vietnam War. 65 to 75 units from March Field deployed frequently, flying hundreds and hundreds of missions from the 22nd Bomb Group here. You'll see an ARC-like mission in progress there. You'll also see the flight crew. And down here, you'll see them they were deploying here in the March 1970 that you see. And March was also one of the reception centers for Operation Homecoming. Operation Homecoming, when we brought the POWs back from North Vietnam. So it was a substantial center then. Both Norden and March were involved. The end of the Cold War. My second favorite March Field picture. Any who have ever spent the time and worked online and worked in this kind of an environment know what true exhaustion is. My younger days, 1,000 years ago, as a young lieutenant, I had the capability to sleep in the last chance area of the flight line, which is where they bring the aircraft in and rev them up and go, right? So you're right there with all the afterburner blast and everything. It was F4s that I was dealing with. But the military seems to have a way to be able to exhaust you to the point that you learn to grab sleep whenever you can. So you see this young man, one of the crew chiefs, taking a little nap, right there on the line. When the Cold War ended in 1982, the last B-52 departed out of March, and March changed its mission. The 22nd Bomb Wing converted and became the 22nd Air Refueling Wing. This is a KC-10. In 1983 at March Field, KC-10s were called the KC-10 extenders, and they were responsible for fueling other aircraft. And there's a quote from Kurt LeMay that I think is spectacular. Kurt LeMay once said when they were arguing over whether or not we should have aircraft carriers, he said, we don't need aircraft carriers, all we need are refuelers, we need some decent planes, decent pilots, and non-candy-ass pilots is exactly the way he put it. But we can hit anywhere from the continental United States, anywhere else in the world that we need to. He was a true believer in the concept of strategic bombardment, and this KC-10 helped to make that capability continue on into the future. Now, if you've been watching our news at the museum lately, we now have a KC-10 as one of our collection. We're currently up to 112 aircraft, and a KC-10 came in just a couple of months ago. And it was one who was assigned at March Field in 1984, so it's basically come home. It doesn't look like that anymore, but it will once we raise enough funding to repaint her. Other things changed, of course, at March Field. The 1st California Air National Guard Group came in, the 163rd. They had been out at Ontario, and they moved out to March Field, flying F-4s, which they, of course, for the most part, loved. Cool-looking airplane, very capable. They got to be fighter pilots, and everybody likes that. And something else changed considerably at March. The concept of warfare changed in the sense that there were other things considered to be a war. This is when the war on drugs began during the 1980s. And March Field became very important as Central Command Center. The Air and Marine Operations Center is at March Field. It still is there today. Its mission has slightly changed, but in the beginning its mission was to basically stop general aviation smuggling coming across our borders, any of the borders, from Mexico, from the Caribbean, from Canada. This is a picture of the AMOC as it stands today. The two other photos are photos from, and this is my background. After I got out of the Air Force, I went into narcotics interdiction with the Department of Treasury and then Homeland Security. The one on the right, the 2,000 pounds of cocaine that went into Chino, that was our first major seizure once we opened up our new facility. And then the upper one is one that went up into Northern California that we hit there. But I can easily say that in a war that largely seems somewhat irrelevant nowadays, we accomplished what we were supposed to do. And March Field was central to that. We stopped aviation smuggling, general aviation smuggling, and brought it to a complete halt. Made it so expensive and so risky for the smugglers that they started to do things that you see now, dig tunnels, and find other ways through. Not that, but hey, that wasn't my part. I didn't have to find the tunnels, I just had to find the airplanes. The AMOC, when it first came into existence, the average NORAD facility had a capability of 12 radar antennas. And at the time, there were 4 major NORAD facilities in the country. An FAA center could do maybe 9 to 12 radar antennas. The Air and Marine Operations Center for the Department of the Treasury at the time could do 450. So that gave it comprehensive coverage over most of the United States and the areas leading up to it. Now, with upgrades in their system, they can even do more. So it's an incredible facility. It's actually the most sophisticated command and control center in the entire world, sitting out there at March Field. Still up and still functioning. 1991, and the base realignment. It was a difficult period for March, and you saw an awful lot of things change there too. A lot of things happened, of course, with the Gulf War. You'll see some of and these are photographs of people deploying for the Gulf War there, the 141s that were there, a little bit of 135 maintenance where you get really truly into the business there as he's inside the engine. 1994, the 22nd Refueling Wing departed, and March began to transition away from being a regular Air Force base into an Air Reserve base. This, of course, was what everybody referred to at the time as the peace dividend. Now that there was no Cold War, now that things were calm across the entire world, that we weren't going to have to spend quite as much money on the military as we had before. It was an excellent idea and certainly a good thought. It just didn't necessarily work out that way. But after 88 years of constant service, March as an active Air Force base ceased to exist, and it became an Air Reserve base. Now, becoming an Air Reserve base didn't stop March from operating. It was still there and still kept going. It's called an active Air Reserve base, so it constantly has activity. You see C-17s there, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But at the time, there were F-16s there from NORAD with a 144th standing NORAD alert. When you hear them, and you probably hear them every morning at 10 o'clock, they go out and do a practice mission. So when you see them ripping out of there, that's who they are. They're armed interceptors working for the North American Air Defense Command, and they're there to look at anything unusual or unidentified coming across our borders. Now, if you see them at 10 o'clock, don't worry. That's when they do their normal training flights. If you see them at any other time, then you want to turn on the news and find out what's going on, because something's happening. And of course, KC-135s too, with the reserves at the time. Let's go ahead and kick through and talk about the War on Terror just a little bit. March Field has become a deployment base. It's an area that's easily located within easy distance of some major military facilities. So you fly Marines from Pendleton out, Army from Irwin, from many different areas. They come in through March that has such a great runway, so it's a place that they go in order to be able to deploy wherever they're going to end up. So when the War on Terror began, Marines deploying to Southwest Asia there, you see them See the the KC-135 operating too. The global war on terror brought a little bit of a change. The 452nd Air Mobility Wing began their operations at March Field, and they continue, of course, that today. Let's take a look at 141s. I'm a real fan of 141s. We do have one at the museum. It was the first jet transport the United States ever had, very capable aircraft, and another one that was delivered on time, under budget, which is always great when you're dealing with that. One of the great things that the 141 did is for years and years they did Operation Deep Freeze, so they'd fly down to the Antarctic and supply the Antarctic areas down there. So it was a fun mission to fly on if you ever had the chance. But the last one departed out of March Field in 2005. New things started happening at March Field then. The 452nd Air Mobility Wing transitioned to a new aircraft, the C-17 Globemaster II. Globemaster II is also, well, I say this way too often, it's a beautiful airplane. For me, and as a curator of an air museum, aircraft have many, many different roles and many different things that you could admire about them, not just their capabilities, but they're also a piece of art. When you look at them, they're streamlined and the way they're designed and stuff, some of them are just attractive. Some are not. There is an F-89, which is one of the worst looking airplanes ever, but the C-17 is a beautiful aircraft and very capable. While the 452nd transitioned to C-17s, they also kept their KC-135s. And the 163rd, which was assigned there at March at the time and still is, switched from being, they were flying 135s by that time. They had switched from F-4s to 135 tankers, and they became a drone operating organization. So drones are the up-and-coming thing, and they are incredibly capable. They have the ability to be able to stay up in the air for sometimes days at a shot. They can provide you great surveillance in a particular area. They can also be used as armed platforms, but you know, they just take all the fun out of aviation. You know, if you're not climbing in the airplane yourself, it's just not as much fun. But they converted to MQ-1s at the time. They're now doing Raptors, which are a more advanced version, but very effective, and they're flying missions all over the world from March Field. With a satellite link, you simply forward deploy the aircraft themselves, put them wherever you need to in order to get them in theater, and then you can control them from a Connex box or an office space inside at March Field or at Creech over in Nevada. It's a completely different world. You might sense a touch of sadness in that one for me. It's just not as much fun that way. Then, of course, the 912th Air Refueling Squadron was assigned to March, and it was reactivated and assigned to March. They were assigned to the 452nd. Now, I'm throwing out a lot of numbers, which just puts everybody to sleep, even me. But the 452nd has a unique role. The March Field has a unique role. With the 912th, it's an active duty group. It's active duty working with a reserve squadron, and that concept of being able to bring both the reserves and the active duty people together and function together, very important for our ability to be able to push forward power wherever we need to throughout the world. So it was first tested here at March Field and proved to be a real success and continues on. It's called the Active Associate Program. You see the boom operator there with the 332nds, and then doesn't that look like a fun job?
Yeah.
The best part is he's laying down. So I spent the vast majority of my time in aircraft in the Air Force sleeping, so I understand perfectly what he's up to. But it's a comfortable job. Now with the new aircraft that are coming out now, they don't lay down in the back anymore, which is a terrible shame. Here's the future of March Field. As of January of last year, March was proposed to get to about 12 KC-46s. Pegasus, they're the new aviation or aerial tanker. It looks like everything's online for that to happen, so it appears that March is going to continue to succeed and continue to survive for another however many years. That particular aircraft, if it's anything like, say, the B-52, which came into service in the mid-1950s and is still in service today, probably guarantees that March Field will continue to exist for another 50 years at least. Of course, during that time period, we also did something else a little different at March Field. We brought the first COVID victims back from China and put them at March in an attempt to scare the living hell out of everybody in the country. Which apparently we did, but they did a nice job keeping them quarantined as far as I can tell. Does anyone have any questions? Sir?
Yeah, how long did General Auld command the base?
You know, I can't give you an exact date. I'd have to look that up for you, but he was there for at least 4 years.
Okay, well, my dad was a doctor here at the clinic, Dr. Richard Boylan. He was a urologist, and he operated on General Auld and saved his life. So,
Did he?
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. General Olds was a very unique individual. You know, not only did he have a golf thing named after, of course, that's the other rule in the modern Air Force that I was in, is that you build the officers club, then you build the golf course. That's the way it went. General Olds was well known for his time during the Second World War. What he would do is take a British Spitfire fighter that he had borrowed from the RAF and fly it through the center of his own formations when they were out on training flights in England. And he would do the best that he could to scare the hell out of the pilots and tell them, you know, tighten up, if I can get through here, so can the Germans. So he was a very unique and very aggressive commander, so a particularly interesting man. Never had the opportunity to meet him myself. I did meet Kurt LeMay, who was a really interesting guy. But everything I've heard about Archie Olds is he was an incredible guy. Any other questions? Sir?
You said when we set up the base in 1918, we agreed to build a road.
Yes.
Do you know what road that was?
No.
Okay.
I'm guessing that it was probably what now is Van Buren. It's either Van Buren or it's possibly, it's not Cactus, certainly not. It's probably Alessandro. So either one of those two, but I'd have to do some research to find out for sure.
Alessandro was later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the agreement to build the road, they never specifically said that they were going to do anything like pave it.
Back then you do.
No. And there is the other consideration in this, is that not only did the Riverside Chamber of Commerce, of course, did everything they possibly could to be able to put the field here, the property actually belonged to Hendricks Ranch, and they sort of foreclosed on the property in order to be able to do it, and sold it to the government for $1 an acre. So, and then didn't charge them for it. So you know, they did everything they possibly could to make sure that that field came here. And Riverside City Council, Riverside, and then the community itself has basically done everything they possibly could to make sure that the field stayed there ever since. So I can tell you one thing from Marchfield, as a person who was once assigned there and now is a curator of the Marchfield Air Museum, is that March has always had a warm spot for Riverside. They've always been connected, and well, probably always will. Any other questions? Sir?
Well, I was born at March, so it's interesting to hear all this, but as I grew up as a kid, we had Norton Air Force Base in close proximity, and you shared the mission of March. Why did we have two Air Force bases?
It was built. It was built during the Second World War, when it was necessary to get as many training bases out there as they possibly could. There were probably a half a dozen bases that didn't survive. Remember, George was pretty close too. All of these were built during the war when it was necessary to do major training here in the States. Almost every training base that you see, or the operational bases at the same time, you'll see a dual mission, like March had the air defense role. But they pushed the air defense guys out to these satellite fields instead of being right there at March.
And one more, if I may, were any movies like Strategic Air Command or something ever filmed at March?
There were several that were filmed in the 1930s that were at March, including, you know, I'm going to blank on exactly what the titles were. This Test Pilot was filmed here. Yes. And trying to think of other 1930s and 40s. There were actually movies filmed all the way through the 80s at March. It's been pretty prominent in the movie industry. It's so close. You know, so close to Hollywood and so easy to use, and it's out here far enough that there's not a lot of interference, so you see quite a bit of it during that time period. But Test Pilot's the one that leaps to mind. I think that's because it's a Clark Gable one.
I was just
Yes,
going
ma'am.
to say, the museum, Riverside Museum is putting out a list of the movies made in Riverside, including those, because they have their 100th anniversary next year, and they're showing Riverside movies.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so they're compiling a list.
It was so very important for us to be connected to the Hollywood industry at the time. There were many, many movies. I'm blanking on any other than the really big ones there. Yes, ma'am.
So the museum's open to the public?
Yes. Yes. It's currently a nonprofit, a 501c3, so it's not officially associated with the Air Force anymore, other than the fact that we have aircraft that are on loan. Some of our aircraft are on loan from the Air Force. But it is a nonprofit. It's a a foundation. It's not part of the government. That being said, I have to put out the plea, of course, that as a nonprofit, we are always looking for money, always looking for donations. We get zero from the government, from either the state government or the federal government. So anything that we can get from other donations, we're always happy. So, any other questions? Thank you very much for having me here today.